Alrighty, so welcome everyone. Today we're going to be diving into the world of open source software and blockchain innovation. I really couldn't think of two better people to join us today than the two pioneer minds in the tech industry. First, we have Motte, who is one of the brilliant creators of dotenv. It's a tool essential for managing environment variables in development environments. And then also, we're thrilled to have Max Howell, who's the renowned creator of Homebrew, the popular package manager for macOS. Currently, Max is the CEO of pkgx and a key contributor to the T protocol, which aims to revolutionize how open source software developers are rewarded. So today we're going to be exploring their journeys, the impact of their work, and their visions for, honestly, the future of software development, right? So let's get started and really dive into this. So I know I just kind of breezed through your intros like a tweet. So why don't both of you kind of give our listeners a proper hello and maybe a little peek into your worlds? So the mic is all yours.
I'll go maybe first, Max. So, I mean, what you said there is spot on, D, creator of dotenv, which, when I created dotenv, it was very small. It still is a pretty small library. It's not like it's crazy complicated or anything. We can maybe talk about that later, but sometimes there's just value in being sort of first and creating a simple solution. But these days now, dotenv's been around for the node one, which is the one I created. There are other implementations in other languages, but it's been around for 11 years, going on, I think, 12, and heavily used, that sort of thing. But it's been, over a decade, starting to show its warts. So my day-to-day now is really building a new version that some of it will get probably subsumed into the standard dotenv, but the new version's dotenvx. And so day-to-day is just building that, which has been building the open source version of that first. And then on top of that, we'll probably have some sort of, we got to figure that out still, but extra features, extensions, things like that. So yeah, that's me. You can go ahead, Max.
Yeah. Like we are kind of the old school at this point, aren't we? With our old open source libraries going on. Yeah. So
Homebrew's how old now?
15. Just turned 15.
Insane.
In May was when I did the first commit.
Okay.
So that's what we consider the birthday, but it's a good commit, worth looking up. I for some reason decided to embellish it.
Sorry to interject again real quick, but I think the first time I even installed Node, I don't know, maybe that's not true, but I wasn't super early to Node. I think I used Brew to install it. I think so, so it's sometime around that period of time, because I think NPM is about 13 years old, maybe 14. So sorry, but I digress. So.
Yeah, I think Node was one of the earlier packages that we added. I don't remember exactly. I was merging hundreds of formula at the time, but I definitely remember NPM being pretty early, because the creator, Isaacs, didn't like how we were packaging NPM, and so he came on to the GitHub and was telling us what he wanted and things like that. And I remember one of the first times I was like, well, should we do what is best for our users, or should we do what the package author, wants us to do? And it was a difficult decision. In the end, I went with him because he was angrier than everybody else, I think. But yeah, like Max Howell, I didn't think I'd be a programmer or in the software industry at all, and got into it via open source like 20 years ago or something like that at this point. Created Homebrew, 15 years ago. My first tech job that I got into via open source, and my career's been one of the open source is what I want to do, and the paid work was always trying to find work that was almost as interesting as open source. It never has been. That's the truth. But sorry, go on.
What was your first open source contribution, if you can remember that, like way back? Like, was it just like GitHub, or is this even before GitHub then?
Oh, it was before GitHub. Yeah. This is SourceForge was the thing, but like most open source projects at the time were just like different things on Linux. So I installed Linux one day in a moment of depression because I didn't like the job I had at the time, and discovered all the communities there, and I was using SUSE Linux, so it came with KDE, the K desktop environment. So I'm pretty sure whatever my first contribution was, it was something on KDE, although I can't remember what it was exactly. But sign up for all the mailing lists, got involved in the all the development discussions, and then found some avenue into there. I also made like some app. That was really my first proper experience with open source, which was a utility for displaying your disk usage, because I had like a 3 GB hard disk, I think. So I was continuously running out of disk space, especially because I liked downloading music. Probably was bigger than that. Maybe it was a few gigabytes.
Okay.
More than that.
How'd you distribute that tool back then? Because this is before Brew, right? So did you put on SourceForge then, I guess? Or you just
No. What did I use for source control? It was CVS at the time, so that was the precursor to Subversion, which was you can consider the precursor to Git.
Yeah, I remember Subversion.
It was okay, much better than CVS. CVS had this thing where every file was independently versioned, so it was very easy to get into a situation where you didn't actually have the same checkout as like the other people you were working on. Very easy, happened all the time. But I remember I published to, I think it was kd-apps.com. I don't know where the source code was hosted or if I was even using source control for it. I think they hosted the tarballs, and nobody distributed binaries. In order to get distributed as a binary, it had to be added to the Linux distributions themselves, which didn't happen easily at all, as you can imagine. Most of them were very behind, which is why I ended up installing Arch Linux in the end before I switched to Mac, because they were a lot more current. And they had a way that you could publish to the user repo so that you could publish your own packages. And I made an open source tool to facilitate that called Walker, as I recall, which I wrote in D, which one of the many attempts at replacing C++. One of them was called D. Well, several of them were called D, actually, just to make it confusing. Several people made several programming languages. None of them took off, obviously.
The hardest thing, if something takes off or not,
Yeah, like you never know. Like I'm sure it's the same for you, but the vast majority of my open source has never gone anywhere.
Yeah, totally the same. And then some little package ends up huge, where the first commit like 50 lines of code and a README,
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah. Like Brew is a little more complicated than that.
Well, Brew was pretty simple initially, but that was part of the appeal and why it took off. But I think the main reason it took off is because Mac was becoming the developer platform of choice. And I wrote it in Ruby, which was very popular at the time because of the Ruby on Rails community, and they all used Mac.
Yep.
And the other package managers weren't that great. Like Magports and Think were the main ones. They were all right, but I really pioneered the idea of user contribution being the main thing, right? Like, as I said, like Linux was frustrating because you had to compile everything from source, and it barely ever worked. And you had to become a master at understanding auto tools and make and compiler tool chains and things just to get some software that wasn't distributed by the Linux distribution. So with Homebrew, like really, it predated all the new package managers that typically do that by default. The idea of it being primarily like I wanted normal people who use computers to contribute these packages and get into it. And I made it as simple as possible for them to do so, because I knew just how complicated building things from source was. So that was part of it. Like even though we just said that most of the open source we worked on, we didn't know if it would take off, and usually it doesn't. I kind of had this feeling that Homebrew would the whole time I was building it, and then it did, and I just wasn't surprised.
Okay.
So this is what I thought would happen.
Okay, nice. Yeah, like going back to what you said, kind of making all that easier for all those Linux professionals that have been around a long time. I think, you know, dealing with make files and everything was super simple, but I was like a junior programmer back then, right? And self-taught. So I remember trying to install things like that and not knowing what to do. And then, you know, and dealing with Mac ports, and like sometimes it kind of would work, other times it wouldn't. Even just like getting the install right on the Mac seemed really hard. And then, yeah, Brew is like curl install Brew, and then you just had access to all these libraries, which I probably saw somewhere else. I think it was Node where I maybe first saw it, where it's like, oh, you can use Brew, and I'm like, well, what's that? You know, basically took something that was two commands, so that was huge as a junior engineer. So I still like to think about software from a junior engineer's perspective, because, you know, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, a junior engineer can or will contribute great software, but like there needs to be easier ways to get them started at first, you know, basically kind of less gate, but hard to do. It's hard to make things easy, especially if you're used to doing things another way and it seems easy to you.
Yeah, me and you are like completely aligned on that. Like we've met before, audience, and we've discussed similar things. But yeah, like I think a lot of open source misses that bit. Like if you make it so that people who aren't familiar with these tools can use them, then you're going to do a lot better as a tool and advance the whole industry as well, right? Like that's open source's power is and that's what's so tantalizing about it, that you can contribute something that can be completely revolutionary for everyone. But you really have to take it down to the basics. And no one cares how a package manager works, right? Like no one wants to understand the details. And I think a lot of the package managers came before Homebrew delighted in forcing you to understand how they work. Like, I think Nix is a great example of the next generation of that kind of philosophy. And some people love it because they're the kinds of people who really want to understand everything about how their tools work. And so, there's two major kinds of devs in that respect. And you and me were always the ones where we wanted to build the thing we wanted to build. And everything else was in the way of us getting there.
That's how I learned coding. It was, I want to make something, and I guess I need to learn to code to do that. And then I've enjoyed it and become better at it, but it's always been in the pursuit of some product or some feature or, you know, some tool. So where sometimes I envy the people that are more fascinated by, like, you know, like really how things work and that sort of thing. But I've just realized over the decades, it's not me as much, you know, unless it's my own tool I'm building. So, but
you need like a bunch of devs like that. Like we have a bunch on staff who love getting into all the details of how everything works, and you need them, and then you need to make sure they stay on focused because they can get carried away sometimes and work on the wrong things. Like we're more product oriented. That's the truth of it, and you need like you need a good number of engineers who are very engineering focused, but even they don't want to understand how everything works. Like some of these people who maybe who love Nix because they can get into the weeds with it and they really understand like the fundamentals of the pieces that are under there. They probably don't understand how the kernel works. You know, they choose where they're figuring out things, and I have a surface level interest in all of that stuff, but became obviously more of an expert in package management because I really wanted a package manager that got out of the way. But then having said that, and I think that you build tools in exactly the same way, I tried to make it so that the way Brew worked was so simple that if you were interested, you could really quite easily get an understanding about it, and it made it composable that people could build things on top of it. And so then you ended up with like the system, like the cask system, right, which I never liked, but loads of people really love, and that would just came about because it was possible. It was easy to figure out how to integrate that into there. And I think that's, with open source, it's very important that your users can easily see how they can contribute, right?
Yeah, I do like about the cast system though that you can get started more quickly, right? So even in my mind, there's less friction there because I can go create some binary that I want to put on Brew, right? Have it ready, be using it myself, share it with friends, even start letting users use it before I need to go make a pull request to really that core repo, which, you know, I don't know how long that's going to take. Is it hard? It's just that kind of added friction. So, you know, I've enjoyed it.
And it proved to be a very, very popular feature that I wouldn't have approved, but I didn't need to be the person who was approving that, right? It was very simple for someone to make it separately. But yeah, when, you know, when these little details of open source, it's a funny ecosystem. Like, what got you into open source initially?
I was a very early programmer building websites for people. It was like WordPress, stuff like that. And then I started getting into Ruby on Rails because my customers needed like more and more complex type work done. So I basically, at the time, I think I had a real estate client, and, you know, they needed to do listings and they needed a back end for that. You know, this is before real estate agents had websites. So started building that for them instead of just static pages. And we were going to maybe turn it into a product, that sort of thing. And so at the time, instead of doing WordPress or PHP, because I tried to start it in WordPress, but it got really messy. There was like a self-hosted WordPress. I mean, everything was self-hosted at the time, but there was kind of like this multi-site WordPress at the time. And so I was dealing with that. It was a pain. And then I came across Ruby on Rails. I don't remember how or why. And so started building in Rails. And then, long story short, a year or two later, started going to SD Ruby, which was San Diego Ruby. And back then it was just like such a great meetup every month with like so many talented people. We're talking like the people who started Engine Yard, the guy Yehuda Katz who created the, you know, the gem file, like,
yeah, I remember
big things, right? Like, you know, package JSON's based on the gem file, right? Like big things. And I was just, you know, this like junior guy getting to be around these guys. And then also they made you do a presentation like after 3 visits. So I'm like, I go up there, do a presentation on, I think it was Mongo at the time, because Mongo was new. So, you know, I'm not doing any open source yet, but I'm like, oh, I've been using this and here's how it is, you know, and people would ask questions. And then those guys started making MERB. And so I got involved a little with that, contributed a little bit to MERB, like some of the gems, because it was basically like, instead of having one gem, their whole concept was a little more like the early NPM world where you have multiple packages. So they had like a MERB core and like all these other features, a MERB auth, right? Which eventually got like, there was a whole like kind of civil war or battle, and then that all went into, yeah. But that was my initial, and I can't even tell you what the gem was, but there was some PR to one of those early MERB gems. Maybe it was MERB auth or something, because I was building things in MERB. And yeah, that was my first contribution. And GitHub had just come out around then, so everything was on there. So it was much easier to do. But I don't think the pull request had been invented yet on GitHub. I think it predates the pull request, but it was,
yeah.
You know,
that's how we know we're old school. We remember GitHub before pull requests.
Yeah. I've got my GitHub user is like, it's like 3,000 or something like that. It's a real low number. You know, it was like, I was in that world. Yeah. By chance. You know? So.
How do you get your ID? I've never checked mine. Like, is there it must be API.
Yeah, there's an API.
GH command can do it.
Ask ChatGPT these days, like, hey, here's my profile.
Oh yeah, of course. Why am I asking you?
it'll do it better, you know.
But I wonder if the GH command can tell me, because yeah, I must have been pretty early. I'm not sure if I was that early, like 3,000, pretty low.
You might have been using it, but not like signed up, you know. But I was, because I also wasn't. I just touched Subversion. And I was such a junior engineer. I had such a hard time with it. And then Git had just come out, right? And Rails was using Git early. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to switch to Git. This is so much easier. That was before GitHub. GitHub came out very soon after, it felt like, by the time I discovered Git, you know? So
I think you're the first person I've ever heard to say that Subversion was harder than Git. Like, most people find Git to be completely incomprehensible, even today.
I know, but I don't know. Maybe the docs were easier or something, or that community that I was in. Because keep in mind, I was very junior, right? Like, I needed like instructions. So it was probably something like that. you know?
Yeah. I remember Subversion was tricky in some ways. Like you had to get a lock to commit because well, it wasn't branches in the same way Git has them. At least you could make branches, but they were complex. So most people just like operated on a single branch, and so you had to just sort of be lucky if you could commit or not. Like you had to keep merging with. Well, it wasn't even merging, right? Like I don't think they had merges like Git, and the tools that Git was based on pioneered that idea. But yeah, cool. My claim to fame on low user IDs is I have a very low Instagram ID because
Nice.
I got invited to the precursor to Instagram, which was called Bourbon. It was actually meant to be a Foursquare clone, if you remember. Foursquare, it was the location sharing thing. Yeah,
I use it a lot.
cool,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I used that a lot at the time.
Yeah.
Dating ourselves here, it's like what 2010 or something, that was
Yeah,
2009 or something like that.
yeah.
15 years-ish. And that was because my friend was in with the right VC, so we got invited to that. So we created accounts on that, and then they pivoted to Instagram and they rebranded and everything, and then obviously Instagram. Sure, I probably could have got a single letter Instagram ID like AM or whatever, but I've always been MXCL everywhere, so I just did that, and yeah, well, still got my
nice.
4 letter cycles. Yeah, I don't know.
Back to Homebrew though, like you talked about, creating it, but like the initial idea came from you just being annoyed with Mac ports and the Linux world.
Yeah, well, it was a combination. So the company I was at, which was Last.fm, I was the developer on the client team, and we made 6 different apps. And so we built everything on Mac with either a VM or cross-compiling, or how do we do it? It was VM for Linux and Windows mostly. And so, we used Mac ports a lot because it was the package manager, and it was just like too frustrating. I found I needed like newer versions of things, and there was no easy way to control that in a way that the team would end up with the same versions of things. So I was complaining a lot to everybody about how the tooling sucked. Like even then, I was just fed up with tools getting in the way of me trying to achieve my goals. And one of my coworkers got fed up and challenged me to do something about it and shut up. So I realized, before that, I hadn't really realized that, I could try and make my own. Like, how hard can it be to make a package manager, right? Turned out making the package manager is pretty easy, but designing it so that it's resilient to like the crazy ways that open source coexists with all the different pieces, that was the complex part. So it was quite easy to get spun up, and then it was only after it got popular that I realized how much I'd bitten off, and that maybe it was a bad call, but I thoroughly enjoyed its ascent into popularity and being part of that, so I have no regrets on it. But yeah, it was very much like you. I had something I needed, and it didn't exist, and I built it.
Yeah.
Which I assume is the story behind dotenv.
Yeah, like dotenv, the short story is I was working at SendGrid at the time as a developer evangelist, actually. So, part coding, part marketing. Wasn't really marketing, but just you go to hackathons, buy people drinks, help them code, and show them how easy SendGrid is. And at the time, SendGrid's an email API, for those that don't know. And it was the first email API, and it was like the only one. And at the time, everything was moving on to like Heroku had just come out. SendGrid was the first add-on for Heroku, and everyone was moving to this idea that you don't really have a file system, even maybe, but you host with some provider and they make it easy for you. But like, how are you going to send emails now, right? Because you don't have a server to install. Like I forget what the email client was, Postfix, something like that.
Sounds.
Yeah, but I might be saying that wrong right now. Where you set up basically your own mailing box, right, to send email. That's how you used to.
Yeah.
When I started building,
nobody does that anymore. But people used to do that sort of thing, right? They used to host their own mail servers, like crikey.
Yeah, and I mean now there's other problems because spam's become this is debatable, right? But spam's become a harder problem. But
Spam
Basically,
made it so that we had to centralize it. Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of Gmail. It's so I'm broad strokes here, but Gmail's kind of centralized that, and SendGrid was also a part of that too, because we were solving these problems, but now as you solve these problems of making it easy, you become the big dog, and you get to talk to Gmail because you're sending so many emails a day to Gmail, right, through all these services. And so then they started building sort of this system to verify where emails are coming from. So SendGrid's kind of a part of that. So is every email provider now. But there's kind of like a back office system for that. I don't really know the details, but I remember there were lots of conversations like that. So yeah, now if you just set up your own mailing box, like, good luck staying out of spam. I know guys.
Yeah, you'll go straight into the spam folder every time. Like it's a very interesting story. I think email, seeing as it is a decentralized system that had to solve for a lot of unanticipated problems, and yet here we are, 30 years later, and it's still going very strong. Like, email is still a fundamental piece of the internet. Didn't do as well as, I'd say, HTTP or TCP/IP in general in terms of resilience. Spam, huge problem still.
Yeah, which that's another conversation that I think somewhere in the email spec, if I remember right, or it was at least proposed at one time, is sort of like a proof of work type mechanism.
Really?
We're talking crypto here and stuff, but like there'd be like at least some CPU cost to sending an email that would cost energy, that sort of thing. That's still very interesting concept to me, that, now everything's centralized. We basically trust SendGrid. It's like, yeah, just go do that. But like, imagine if your email client instead said and maybe you could set your own level, right? Like, you're a CEO of a company, you probably get all kinds of spam that you really don't want, that sort of thing. But somehow there was something in the protocol where you're like, well, I want someone to do this much proof of work, just like run a bunch of hash mechanisms.
That's interesting.
Before I can receive the email, until then I trust the person, like, hey.emails type concept, like I trust them. And now they don't have to do that proof of work, and somehow they get notified. But I've always thought that would do that potentially could be so good for email and not have the centralization anymore. And we could all just have a little library that sends emails, and not have to use SendGrid and all that. And I'm saying this, I was, a SendGrid dev evangelist, and like obviously did okay when the company went public and stuff. But a lot of us inside of SendGrid were, discussing these kind of ideas too at the time. So
interesting.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's some crypto projects out there who probably implemented that.
probably.
But momentum of email is like crazy. I don't think it's easy to replace. But we didn't get through to how you ended up creating .env yet. So
So developer evangelist, and so part of being a developer evangelist is you do live coding. So I would go to like Penn and Michigan, and we do these live demos in front of like 2,000 college kids, right? And you get 5 minutes, sometimes only 3 minutes, sometimes only 2 minutes, and you have to show the product, within a few minutes, because then the hackathon kicks off, and you're telling people, hey, use SendGrid for your project, right? And Twilio was there, and like all these other companies were there. Rap Genius was even there. Like, there was all these kind of cool companies pitching their software, their APIs to these hackers. And so I would do these live demos where you need a key in there, right?
Right.
And so .env became my solution for, you shouldn't be putting this in code. You should be separating it. And I can't credit that with having the idea to do that. Right. I built the node library, but that idea really came from the people at Heroku, particularly the guy that made Foreman, I think. And then he made the 12-factor config. I think that's the same guy or the same team. And then Beekeeper's, what's Beekeeper's real name? But in the Ruby world, he creates the first .env library, which I start using. And then I'm getting into Node at the same time, where it was pretty early in Node. And I'm like, oh, let me just port this over. Like, we need this in the Node world. Because my demos were usually Node, because a lot of the hackers were also getting into Node. So yeah, so that's the story of .env. I wrote it on an airplane the first time, committed it when I landed, or pushed it up to GitHub when I landed. And the first version is only like 34 installs still to this day, right? 001. And like, and then just it was just surprising, like over time, because I had a lot of people tell me that's a dumb idea. Like, why would you do that? There's also, you know, but I wasn't used to that when you build things, most people tell you that's dumb. You can already do it like this.
Mm-hmm.
But I was still,
engineers especially, they love to tell you how stupid your concept is.
Yeah, I just posted dotenvx on Hacker News today, actually, and it caught a little bit. And most of the comments are, you know, because dotenvx is adding this encryption mechanism to dotenv files. So it's not built into dotenv. It's a separate library and all that, CLI. But it's adding encryption as this pattern. But it's been pretty well vetted out now, like been using it for the last 6 months. And there's also like 2 years of history with the dotenv vault file, which also had encryption. But like most of the comments are just, you know, there's so, you know, it's just like, this is so dumb, right?
Why would I need this? I could set up 34 different packages to do this using my script library of 10 to 15 different scripts and maintain that myself. That's what they say.
Yeah,
right?
it's just fine. I mean, maybe they're smarter than me, but like dotenv particularly, there was one at the time called config, and it's still popular, but it was a JSON based config, right? And so that one was like really popular in the node world. And so all my buddies were like, dude, there's already this one, like it should just be JSON. Like this is node, you know, and I could get into debates around that, but there's some elegance to the simplicity of a dotenv file, you know. So there's all different solutions for this, but a dotenv's definitely cemented itself as one that makes a lot of sense, especially when you start trying to port these dotenv files to other mechanisms. Like you can just source it, right, in Linux. Like that's powerful. You can't just source a JSON file, right? So there's
you know,
yeah.
Sorry, I was gonna say, like, you know, your story really resonates because, like, I think that's one of the big things about open source is that you don't need to be an expert in something before you start, and then you become the expert that everyone says is dumb on Hacker News. I've never been on Hacker News without a lot of people saying like mean things. Frankly, I don't like the place.
Like, how about pkgx? Did you post pkgx on Hacker News, or did somebody? And did you see what people? And also, I want to hear the story of pkgx, but go ahead.
Yeah, I never post things on Hacker News myself. It seems gratuitous. Like, I feel that, especially with open source, if you can't get the attention of the people you're trying to get hold of without, you know, you posting to Hacker News yourself. Like, obviously, I use other mediums, and I don't typically read anything about me on Hacker News after my Google interview tweet in 2015.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember. I've re-looked at that too before, like in the last year or so, kind of after I discovered your pkgx project, and then was like, oh, this is the Homebrew guy, because I remembered that because my background is not. You know, I wish it was technical, but it wasn't. You know, I went to school and was going to kind of do family business stuff, and then enjoyed programming, so self-taught, and then didn't do that. Kind of, you know, done my own path there, but like some of the interviews, you know, like that just were always like, you know, where every other industry, it seems like, okay, if you made something, if it's, you know, you have years of experience, there's like some value there. And it always seemed like our industry, from, you know, the Googles and some of these companies, was just like, so when that came out, I was like, man, I get that. Go that guy, you know, like I was, you know, but Hacker News tore you apart on that.
I looked at it for a bit, and it wasn't going to be fun to read. As how old was I? 20-something. So okay, no, I'm not going to read that nowadays. I use ChatGPT if anything comes up. I'm like, hi, I'm the Max Howell mentioned in this article. Can you give me a vibe check on what people are saying? That's handy. Yeah, Google thing. Well, I feel bad for them because like they didn't deserve. Well, I didn't mean for it to go that way exactly, but you're right. You know, like there was gatekeeping there, and you know, just because I didn't have these particular skills, they surely could have used me for something. Right? I knew a lot of people at Google used Homebrew, would have made sense for them to bring in the person who maintains it so they could have something that was more suited to what they needed at the very least. But yeah, but yeah, I can use this as a force. If you get mentioned there, it can be extreme high amounts of traffic. Like when we launched pkgx, which was called tcli at the time in 2021, I think it was. Yeah, November 2021. Huge spike in traffic and stars for it. So, it's good. It's good if you can get it for sure.
Yeah.
Open source isn't quite the same. You need that kind of attention now, which is a shame, I think.
Yeah, it's just noisier. pkgx, did it come out of like your company T, or was the idea, because it's a little separate from T now, kind of, right?
It's separate now. Like initially, the idea was to have more integration there with the protocol, and that was the original concept. But as we built out both, we realized that there wasn't a necessity for this connection. And it was confusing to everybody about why there was a package manager associated with this protocol. That's purpose was to make open source sustainable. Like people who wanted to use the package manager didn't understand why there was blockchain shit connected to it, and people who wanted to use the protocol didn't understand why they needed a package manager to use the protocol. So we ended up separating them. So now pkgx is its own separate open source project, spiritual successor to Brew in many ways. I think it's nice. I really like what it is, but I have other plans for its future now. Actually, like once T protocol is launched, I'll probably go down that route. Like I can see an even better tool for it to be in the future.
Can you hint at those? Because I should tell the audience, like, I know for my new project, when I came across pkgx, it's been very useful, right? As like, alternative to Brew. Like it works great as a tool. But as someone who builds tools myself, if you go to the pkgx README and then now you go to the dotenvx README, you'll see like a lot of similarities. So even like the attention to detail there, that's very, to me, it's impressive because I know how hard it is to do that and make a README that's easy. And most open source projects, partially why they don't probably catch, even though maybe some of the tech is good, is they can't succinctly kind of make that README work easily. And it's a back and forth process, right? It's like change the README. Oh, wait, I can do the software. So this installs a little easier. And like, okay, now I can adjust the install. And there's this back and forth that's like, it takes a long time. It's a lot of hard work. So I borrowed a lot of ideas from your pkgx README, and then even the formatting and stuff. But I forget the question I just had.
I spent weeks on that README before we launched it. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Like the README is just so important. I prefer to launch things where it's, the only documentation that you're pointing people at initially is the README at least. And, you got to hook, you got to really know who your users are, and you got to hook them within those first few paragraphs, and you got to make it concise enough that they can skim through it and get a really good idea for like why they would want to use it, but not so concise that it misses the point, and certainly like skipping verbosity, making sure that you tell people how they can be a part of the project, like often a missing piece in many READMEs. But yeah, that initial release, it did too many different things in the end, I realized. So yeah, the question was like where I want to take it. Like I was saying before, like making a package manager is easy, but the packaging is hard. So I'd actually like to transition pkgx more to being a wrapper for other package managers, including Brew. Like as you probably know, like upheaving your previous success in the open source world is very difficult. So Brew, 50, 60 million users, pkgx, I don't know. I know we're shipping like about 0.5 terabyte of packages a day, pushing that out. Which sounds impressive, but then if you consider some of these packages like a gigabyte each, it's not that huge really, but like most of them are tinier. So it's just a fair number. I don't know the exact number of packages that are being pushed. And,
My rule of thumb there is 5 to 10x your stars on a repo. I don't know if that's a bad rule of thumb, but amount of users, maybe.
Yeah.
I would say at least 3 times the amount of users, but probably 5 to 10 usually. I don't know. Sorry, that's kind of that's just speculation.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. Certainly, my other successful open source projects for that kind of growth, with the stars being the metric. But yeah, I like pkgx for the versioning and the packages and the fact that everything installs into the home directory. But really, the thing that makes pkgx cool is that you type pkgx and then you type what you want to run.
Yeah.
People don't really care where these packages are coming from. They just want to run whatever it is without thinking about the installation steps. So being able to source from different package distributions like Brew and we'll keep the pkgx one running, right? Would make it, I think, just exponentially more useful to the vast majority of people out there. And I think, if we could make installing packages with Homebrew like super faster by like rewriting that core piece in Rust, which is basically my plan. So, and everyone loves a good Rust rewrite, right?
That'll get some attention for sure.
Like, one of the cool things about pkgx is you can install things like super fast. It's crazy how much faster it is than Homebrew, and that's just because we host it on good infrastructure. Well, not necessarily going to mirror all of Homebrew's packages to CloudFront, which is what we use, but it's also like properly parallel, right? Can't say the word. Everything's properly parallel, including like checking the checksums, downloading and extracting simultaneously. And Homebrew never did that. Partly it's because like Ruby is a pain in the butt to do that sort of stuff with. And at this point, they're not going to fix that. So I think I could get a bunch of users for the thing by Rust rewrite of the core pieces of Brew, and then it pushes through to Brew for the pieces that I don't want to deal with, right? Like Charlie Marsh is an inspiration in that respect. Like he wrote Rough, the Python linter in Rust, and massive success because it's so fast. But he recently wrote UV, which is a replacement for pip. And much like what we're doing right now, right, like this idea of using these stub binaries that sit in front of other commands, like you do UV space pip, and then you do the pip commands. So he made it so that you're still using the commands you understand with pip, just with the Rust rewrite of it. I don't know if he does all of it or pushes through to the original pip when he doesn't, but that's my intention, right? I'll make it so installs are super fast, but everything else pumps through to the Homebrew Ruby tool. So we can not have to worry about mirroring the entirety of that. And then it's just it's a package runner that's super useful and fast, and you don't worry about it. And it would be very easy to then I'd open source the component which figured out how to use the different package managers. So you could add Nix, and you could add any of the Linux package managers, even Mac ports, for example. And then it's just a useful tool for running stuff. And then you add the shell integrations we have, and I'd add back some of the cooler shell integrations that I removed because it was problematic with the developer environment stuff. And I'd probably drop the developer environment stuff. Honestly, someone else can do a better job of that.
I will say is like someone who just, built a CLI that's distributed over NPM. It's still an NPM module because it's designed to be replace a single line, replace your require.env with require.mvx. But it's also distributed, over Brew. It's distributed via a shell, right? Curl, and the shell script runs and installs it. The binaries are both on NPM and on GitHub. GitHub, because that was easier to wire up to Brew. Brew doesn't really have a mechanism otherwise to unpackage the NPM tar files, because NPM packages them inside of a parent folder package called package. But that I could untar with the curl. And then the reason I liked that, the NPM, putting the binaries. So sorry to step back a little bit. I'm putting binaries actually on NPM under their own NPM packages. So it's like dotenvx -darwin, right? Arch, right? That gives me download counts. So I like that, because then every time a curl install happens, I can actually see, okay, was it a Darwin curl? Was it, a Linux? And I can keep track of those because I get all that for free with NPM. Brew doesn't have any mechanism like that. So I kind of use the GitHub API for that. But if someone installs from source GitHub releases, that also counts towards that. So those are kind of mixed. But all I really want is honestly one place to go through with all that, and it would give me some stats back, and I could put one badge, and that would be very nice. So everything you're describing there, I'm like, oh, that could be very interesting, because if I'm telling my users to run whatever you're going to call this, brew this, like just preface it with pkgx or whatever you end up naming it, or just pkgx. And I could somehow also put install counts. That'd be so nice. So I don't know, just to throw out there, because then that would sit right in the middle.
It would be useful. I can see that. I also know that a lot of people who use these tools hate the tracking that might come with them. Like, we don't have any tracking in pkgx, right? Which is part of the reason I can't tell you how many packages are installed per day, but I do know the bandwidth. But
so maybe I could. Okay, that's interesting, because for me that's nice and important, because I'm building.
Well, Homebrew added tracking after I was no longer like maintainer on the project. I didn't.
Yeah, sorry, you're right. They
say anything about it.
Tracking for core, but I'm still in a keg, so.
Yeah, right. Like in a tap.
Yeah, they don't have a tap. They don't have that.
I think it's just you want it, but nobody else wants it, and that's the problem. And open source is this thing where we don't have those sorts of things, so people want to keep it that way.
Then if I could go a little further, because I could go a little further, like that would be valuable to me. Just like I put, the NPM installs, it's an additional like trust factor that, wow, this many people, like dotenvx now has, dotenv has like 30 million installs a week. But dotenvx, is now up to 250,000 a week. And it's like a little trust to go with, it's only 500 stars, but like, okay, I see it's growing. It's like encourages someone to use something more.
I agree with that.
Or even if somehow I could ping my own, I don't know, it gets messy. So I don't know, kick it around.
Yeah, well, you probably won't get that. You won't get the ping your own, but
GitHub's tracking this, right? NPM's tracking this. The developers using all GitHub releases and using.
And yeah, exactly. Most people don't complain about that.
And then the second thing, okay, sorry, let me just say it real fast. The second thing I would really love to have is, with dotenvx, I'm looking at maybe distributing and having a paid version, kind of like Sidekick does. And Sidekick is, for those in the audience, it's a Ruby gem where you get it for free, like the core, 99% of all the functionality for free. It's open source, but then you pay for these additional binaries, either Sidekick Pro or Sidekick Enterprise. And the developer, which is just one guy, distributes those paid binaries just over his own Ruby gem server, because Ruby gems is actually really easy to host, unlike NPM, which you can't even get the source code for NPM. But like Ruby gems is like, oh yeah, you can just host your own Ruby gems and anyone can pull it in. And it's just like you put the API key inside your gem file or via .env file, whatever, right? There's not a mechanism for that anywhere else, really. Like NPM doesn't really have a way to like distribute something and charge for it, curl, if you do your own curl installer, there's not a mechanism for that. I've always thought that would be interesting too for people distributing software that want to maybe distribute a paid version that has a little extra features. But I don't know. You describing that, I'm like, oh, that could sit in the middle there too. But
well, certainly originally we had ideas more along that kind of way, but I'm not sure if we're gonna be building them here anymore. But it does give me a good way to go into the question about commercial open source and what your thoughts about this new idea, like relatively new, last 3-4 years, commercial open source has turned up. And you can talk about what your intention is on that, what you already said, but please give us more details.
Yeah. So in terms of like .env and commercial, like specifically what I'm trying to do, or in terms
And
of
the
like
dotenvx, paid service.
Yeah, maybe I should back up and just even talk. We should talk about the larger problem first, which you guys have articulated really well. But like the Redis, just talking to Dario before this, and like the Redis scenario is a whole example of that, right? Where the license is basically kind of gets taken advantage of by the community. And so you have this tragedy of the commons, and then they have to go and change the license. And then everyone gets upset by that, where really, I think everyone just wants to reward those early Redis developers for creating something incredible, and there's like no good mechanisms to do that. So like .env, smaller scale, but similar opportunity or similar situation. I'm not like here, like, complaining. Like I have, had good software jobs, things like that. But it is something that's taken 10 years of maintenance, has had to be kept updated, manage a community. You get yelled at, you get like there is all this work that, now it's a key part of the infrastructure of the community. And there's not a good way to sort of maybe, reap some revenue from that, except basically donations, which is only really in the last few years. Or you build a commercial product. So that's the approach I've been taking, right? But even to do that, you still got to have a really good open source project, or maybe that's just me, because it's like, still want to make something good and free for the community. It's useful. But then you're getting into a whole other world. You're not just writing software now. You're like doing marketing. You're thinking about, okay, how do you charge teams for this, companies? You got to start calling them, or have some sort of sales cycle, or, at least some upselling that's just based off, just organic traffic. And I think that's all good and fine. Like I'm excited to be building that sort of thing. That's what we're going to be working on kind of next with probably what'll be. I mean, we built this whole thing .env. We learned a lot from it. We'll keep that going, but I think .envx is probably going to be our foundation now, the open source foundation, and the commercial product on that will be just really good tooling for teams and complex infrastructure to share all those encrypted ENVs and the decryption keys, and just in time access and who gets access to what, like all that kind of stuff will be some sort of pro plan,
And this is a common way that commercial open source is trying to do it, like make something that is a great piece of open source that people can use for free, and then build team or enterprise sort of grade features on top that do require a payment in some manner, because it's a service, right? Service using open source. We've seen great successes there, like Vercel and Superbase.
All VC funded. They have a lot of marketing dollars behind them. A lot of marketing.
Yeah, you can't bootstrap it like you do a normal open source project, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'd argue that certainly Vercel is also proof that it often, I'm sure this won't happen with what you're doing, but I think it often ends up making the open source take a direction that isn't necessarily what's best for the open source ecosystem or the communities that use it, which, well, what happens in open source if you go in the wrong direction and someone makes a fork or makes an entirely new product that then becomes the new hot stuff that Hacker News talks about, and then you just disappear. So that's the risk they're taking with it. But I think it's a very viable mechanism for funding open source if you can figure out how to make that work, right? Like, there's a clear way for you to do it with .envx and .env, which I'm glad you're doing it, and I hope it's super successful, like it should be. But the likes of some tooling, I just don't know how they would do it, right? Some of these fundamental pieces of open source and the open source ecosystem, there's no clear way for like React emoji to make a commercial open source version of itself, for example.
But like to interject real quick too, like even the reason we're interested in T and what you're building, right, and your team's making, is because, you know, we're doing commercial because it seems to make the best sense right now. Otherwise, you're like, you know, oh, just taking donations. But like what you're doing has maybe the opportunity to be like a whole different economic solution. So that's like very interesting to us, even as early as it is. And that's why we're involved. Because yeah, if there was some way to be rewarded for great open source without having to build some SaaS that then kind of, you know, there is going to be some arguable downsides to the SaaS is now you're trusting the SaaS dotenvx Pro with your encryption keys and stuff, right? And we're going to provide the open source where you have to do that. You know, you don't have to use the SaaS, and the conveniences will hopefully be worth it. And, you know, it's just like an AWS secrets manager. They're holding them for you too. But is there a way to do this without that at all? Maybe, but there's like the financial incentive is like, well, what would it be, you know? So it's interesting if there would be some sort of financial system that rewarded just excellent, completely open source, no like hosted solution, you know, like old school kind of tech. And it seems like you guys are at least the closest to trying to pursue that, and you have the background of you've experienced these same problems for, you know, a decade and a half now. So
yeah,
yeah. I don't know if you want to talk. Maybe this is a good intersection, because I just, you know, curious the latest with T, what's going on with it. You guys have, you know, testnet's almost done, I think, headed to mainnet, you know, and maybe just retouching on these ultimate goals you guys have for T.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Like, you know, I came at building T because you know, the other attempts to fix the open source sustainability crisis, it really has become a crisis. Like when I created Homebrew 15 years ago, open source was still kind of niche. It was becoming like a big deal, but it still was mostly considered to be, you know, a bunch of crappy software written by nerds in their spare time that you couldn't trust. But now, you know, it supports everything in the world. And yeah, so donations, is that the most I can expect? But, you know, probably all I'm going to get is a cup of coffee for maintaining
we're talking like a decade later after you've built something that's super significant. Yeah. It's like you get some donations. Yeah. So continue. Sorry.
Yeah, well, no, you know, that's the reality for most of these open source devs who make incredible amounts of software. Like the guy I met doing all this that was making the most was making 24 grand, I think, in donations, which is huge on the donations space for open source, but still, yeah, it's not an incentive, right? It's not an incentive to work on open source full time. What kind of incentive is necessary to not take that software engineering job and do what you want to do, which is open source? And like all the people I've spoken to who are running like huge projects, they want to work on their projects full time. They don't, or you know, or in open source in general, right? They want to have the time to maintain them properly rather than letting these bugs just sit there until someone else has the time to do a pull request, or you get enough angry emails about it that you find a spare moment on a Saturday afternoon to like fix that issue, which is how it goes. Like you've spent thousands of hours, no doubt, on your open source and so have I, and we never expected anything really. But, like, I think that's the most common complaint, criticism of what we're trying to do here at T I've seen is that we were dumb for thinking that making open source would make us any money. And I understand where that's coming from, because, you know, I see how you can see now me saying, well, look, I built Homebrew, give me money. I deserve it. But I didn't build Homebrew for money. I built Homebrew because it was fun. And then over time, it became essential infrastructure that keeps the internet running. And it's unfunded. And that is not sustainable.
I haven't met a single open source founder with that kind of attitude, right? Like, oh, just give it to me. They've always been like, oh, I created this. And then it's just, but I have seen people like melt down and like totally leave their projects completely, right? You've seen like meltdowns on GitHub because the pressure is intense and people don't really understand that. They're like, you're maintaining this for big companies too, and like you get pressure on you. So yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. And you know, I had a different attitude to Mike McQuaid, who took over lead maintainer of Homebrew after I quit doing that. At least I stayed on for a bit, but he's still there, he's still working on it. He is very much like he has his finger on the block button. It's like if you're too demanding or unreasonable, then you're blocked. This is free open source software. We all do it for free. I was always like pretty grateful that people were using the stuff I'd written, even when Homebrew became huge. And so I get angry on GitHub. Like you can see me being angry if you go back through my history for sure. The frustrations of it, you know, the stress, just like you're saying, especially when like these big corporates are coming in, like they're all nice and everything, but they're still like saying, "Can you fix it?" And I'm like, "Hey, you're the one using it and getting paid." So yeah, you know, I get it, but the necessity for something like T to try and fix it is greater than ever. As you say, people are rage quitting these big projects. I keep looking at core.js like every other week or so to see if the guy is like just given up completely, and then you know, like the foundation of pretty much every package in npm is like destroyed. But yeah, so yeah, as you say with T, it's different. That's the key. Like donations don't work because it was the only system we could figure out how to bolt onto capitalism to work with open source. And open source is fundamentally just not capitalist. It doesn't work with a capitalist mindset. It works in a way where people just create stuff and then other people build on top of that, and then you end up with this like incredibly dependent nested graph of innovation, which is happening all over the place.
Yeah.
And the only way you can possibly try to fund that is with a new mechanism. And so it can only be built with crypto. So I'm very excited to see if what we built is going to work or not, right? Because like as we say, it's testnet right now. We're in the final few weeks of testnet before we go live with mainnet on major exchanges. And you know, we believe it's going to work. We've looked at the numbers, we've crunched the data. We think that this is going to make a real difference to the people in open source who keep everything running. But yeah, you never know. Like maybe open source is just not sustainable. But I think like if anyone's going to crack it, it's us. Like we've done the homework, we've built the product, and yeah, we're in the final stages. I think I'm just excited to see Hacker News like people posting about how T made it so they could work on open source full time.
That would be great. That would be so great.
It certainly made me feel better about all the Hacker News comments, which were like, "This is disgraceful. You can't put crypto into open source. It's going to destroy everything. These people are evil. Max Howell is a pest. It should be exterminated, etc."
So maybe in a future, hopefully even a soon future, we have something like that. And then so I don't know, maybe if we could end on this, but in a future like that, what kind of advice would you give like aspiring developers who want to do open source, right? To get involved? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think nothing is ever going to change. Like the way I built T, I was very conscious the whole time that nothing about how open source works can change. Open source is a surprisingly functional system, considering that there's absolutely no money involved in it, and you have to donate your time and efforts in order to make a difference in it. So T's not going to change that. So it's the same advice as ever, which is if you personally have something that you need in your tool set that just isn't there, and you keep talking about it and you're thinking about it and you see that gap for like something which just isn't quite there, then you can build that. You can. If even if like your story where you know someone had done it before and you just ported it to Node, you come up with great new ideas doing that, and that makes it something successful, and you can be a part of that. Like my second most successful open source project is just a promises library for iPhone, and I certainly did not invent the idea of promises. Like that was a very good idea for how to handle async that came about I don't know, during the 2000s or something. I just ported it and I added special features for the platform, and it became really popular. So yeah, I that's what I think. How about yourself?
I would agree. It's just to basically scratch your own itch, build it, and then just build a lot of them, so then you might build something people really love. So
great. Well, thanks very much. Back to you, Dario, to close this out.
Thanks, Max. Great chatting.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you both for your insights. We did uncover layers of insight on open source software and the potential transformative power of blockchain technology and rewarding OS devs. So once again, I just want to thank both Motte and Max for sharing some of these invaluable experiences and also innovative spirits with us too, right? You guys are really pushing the boundaries. And also to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Remember, the future really is being coded right now. So why not be a part of it? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a bunch of deep dives into the technology that's shaping our world. And until next time, keep pushing boundaries and stay curious.